Do I break up with my boyfriend after discovering he hid 8 years of trauma from me? After 2 months of ghosting, he revealed, my family treated my PTSD like a terminal illness. I can't shake the feeling that my love was built on a lie. What now? I, 25 female, and my boyfriend, 28 male, have been in a relationship for 2.5 years. I am a software engineer, and he is employed at a local county disaster management office. We met on Bumble and immediately connected. He was humorous, intellectual, and incredibly compassionate. We shared several hobbies, including video games, drawing, camping, and diving. On our first date, he took me to a small, quiet, yet romantic restaurant. The date lasted 6 hours. Time felt unreal in his company. From that moment onward, we felt inseparable. Not only was he attractive, intelligent, and kind, but he possessed a fascinating perspective on the world and life. It is difficult to articulate, but he has the demeanor of a congenial lumberjack, yet sometimes makes comments that sound as if they originate from an enlightened monk, wise and mature, strangely beyond his years. He interacts with all types of people without hesitation, yet claims to be terrified of them. He enjoys sitting by the window for hours, observing the world and sketching what he sees. He has an entire sketchbook filled with various renditions of his living room, bedroom, and kitchen windows, all in slightly different artistic styles. It was small quirks like these that truly made me, I suppose, fall in love with him. A few months later, I met his family, and he met mine. Both visits went as well as I could have anticipated. His family is lovely and interestingly comprises individuals who are also software engineers. Since then, we have obviously gotten to know each other better. He is an introvert, which explains why every date night he plans is always set in a quiet or relaxed environment, such as the art museum, picnics, or new hiking trails. In contrast, I am an extrovert, so my date nights often involve barbecues with friends, bar hopping, or attending concerts. He has always seemed to enjoy these outings, smiling and laughing, even mentioning them occasionally afterward. As one might expect with any relationship, I continued to embrace the whole yin-yang theme on our dates, believing he appreciated the contrast. About a year ago, I began to notice more details about him and his introversion that raised some red flags. You know how the more time you spend with someone, the more subtle details you notice? For instance, things like him constantly bouncing his knee at dinner, picking at his nails inside his jacket sleeve, finding oddly convenient excuses to leave in the middle of a conversation, or staring out the window. Eventually, I also noticed that he never consumed much food when we were in larger groups. In comparison, he is often ravenous at home and when it is just the two of us dining out. During our annual New Year's Eve party, he walked away mid-sentence while talking to my father, claiming he forgot to wash his hands. No one could locate him for the following 45 minutes. He eventually just appeared in the backyard and asked whether any pie was left. It was awkward momentarily, but my brother was too busy being a drunken fool, so no one really noticed. Once we returned home, I confronted him about leaving for 45 minutes without a trace. He apologized and explained that he needed some time to himself because he was feeling socially overwhelmed. I was puzzled because, in such situations, he usually exits conversations skillfully and politely. This was different. He seemed to have detached himself entirely. Now, I must acknowledge that this was not my finest hour, and I confronted him about his potential undiagnosed anxiety disorder. I mentioned the knee bouncing, his tendency to stare off into space, and his sleeping patterns. He does not sleep more than 4 to 5 hours each night and often spends the remainder of his night wandering, reading, or drawing. He claims it is insomnia and that he has struggled with it since childhood. Medication does not alleviate the issue. I also pointed out that I had been requesting to travel throughout our entire relationship, but he never made time for it. I emphasized that these were clear indicators of something affecting his mental health, and I wanted to help him. He concluded the conversation by shouting, "Could you just leave it?" This startled me and brought me back to reality, as he had never raised his voice at me before. I had never seen him angry in the 2 years leading up to that point. He stormed out and slammed the door behind him immediately after. To add to my distress, there were only 7 minutes remaining until midnight, and I had purchased expensive champagne for us to toast in the new year. Realizing I had crossed a line, I texted and called him multiple times, but there was no response. We share our locations via our iPhones, and I could see that he remained in the parking lot for approximately 20 minutes before finally leaving. I drank the champagne alone while watching the fireworks. After that, it was complete silence. He has no social media presence, so I had no means of keeping track of him and was extremely worried. I discussed the situation with my friends, and they suggested that I consider the possibility that he might be a drug addict trying to conceal it from me. I suppose this could explain everything if viewed through that perspective. In retrospect, I despise myself for even contemplating this. I continued to reach out for days, and after 3 days of no contact, I contacted his family, primarily out of concern for his well-being. His usually talkative mother offered little information other than that he was alright and would get in touch when he felt ready. That night, he stopped sharing his location. Following the cold treatment from his family and the radio silence, I took this as a breakup, or at the very least, a declaration of needing a break, so I decided to leave him alone. Whatever he was experiencing was not something he wished for me to be involved in, and I needed to respect that. 2 painful months later, I find myself writing this post. He finally reached out to me a week ago with a simple "Hey. I have a lot to explain. Coffee?" A part of me wanted to respond with anger for ghosting me after a 2.5-year relationship, but I genuinely care for him and spent every moment of those 2 months thinking about him. So I agreed to meet at a quiet tea shop situated between our residences. During tea, he revealed that there were around 8 years of his life that he had deliberately chosen not to disclose to me. At the age of 18, he became an emergency medical technician and later a paramedic a few years later. He spent the first 8 years of his adult life as a paramedic for the largest and busiest fire department in the state. Additionally, he was a lieutenant and responded to incidents that received international news coverage. He even showed me some news articles featuring him. He retired approximately a year before I met him following a particularly notable incident related to the American school systems. After that event, he was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and has since been engaged in intensive therapy. I suppose he attended these sessions while I was at work, as our schedules differ. He mentioned that, at the outset, it was nearly impossible for him to leave his room. He described how light felt physically painful and that sounds were reminiscent of nails scraping on a chalkboard. He was hospitalized for 7 hours due to what he characterized as the panic attack from hell. He is now on multiple medications. He explained that all of the quirks I had observed were manifestations of his symptoms. He shared that he has been diligently working in therapy to mitigate the impact that triggers have on him, but sometimes he cannot control it, so in those instances, he would leave and ride it out on his own. He stated that whenever he disappears at a social event for longer than a typical restroom break, it is primarily him attempting to breathe it out. He has been doing this for years. He remarked that following his PTSD diagnosis, his family treated it as though he were diagnosed with a terminal illness. They instantly became pitiful, condescending, overprotective, and excessively inquisitive. He clarified that initially, he was candid with his family about his health, but he ceased doing so when he observed them beginning to modify their entire lives to accommodate his mental health. His family started walking on eggshells around him, treating him as though one wrong word would cause him to fly into a rage. Consequently, he refrains from sharing this aspect of himself with others, viewing it as a ball and chain that he has carried from his paramedic life. He confided that after New Year's Eve, he experienced a complete emotional breakdown. I will spare the specifics, but it was quite distressing. He ended up at an inpatient psychiatric hospital several states away that specializes in treating first responders with PTSD. That is why he vanished for the past 2 months. After expressing gratitude for his honesty and openness, I communicated to him that despite everything, I was still angry and needed some time to think before proceeding further. He remained silent. I paid for his tea and departed, leaving him in silence once more. When I arrived home, I discovered dozens of texts from him and his family expressing an array of negative emotions, primarily accusing me of selfishness and questioning my empathy. He left voicemails apologizing and assuring me that it is not like it is portrayed on television and that he would never inadvertently harm me. It already has. I understand that he is grappling with numerous personal issues, perhaps too many for a relationship, but I am more upset about the deception. I invested 2.5 years falling deeply in love with this man as he concealed 8 years of his past from me, a significant portion of his life. Not only that, but he endured considerable suffering and was trapped in a cycle of hardship. I would have supported him, I would have been there for him. However, I cannot overlook the fact that he had nearly a decade of his life from me. I find myself obsessively analyzing every facet of our relationship, attempting to discern what was truly him and what was a manifestation of the PTSD. I feel as though my entire relationship was built on a foundation of lies. It is challenging to view him in the same light now. Every quirk and characteristic I love about him seems to stem from something much darker. On the other hand, I have never connected with anyone as deeply as I did with him. We complemented each other perfectly, and I cherished every single moment spent with him. I find myself dreaming about him and thinking of him constantly. I was confident that he would be the man I marry. What are your thoughts? Story 2. My boyfriend of 5 years just said he feels trapped and is contemplating a breakup. We've faced constant pressure since moving in together, and I'm terrified he'll choose to leave. How can I support him when he refuses help, and can we find our way back? January 18th marks our 5th anniversary, and since we began dating, we have faced numerous personal issues and minor conflicts that have significantly impacted our lives and relationship. We started dating in university after being in the same class, following his expression of interest to a friend. From that moment, we began spending time together, and ultimately, after a month or so of knowing each other, we became a couple. It is important to mention that at that time, I was very attached to home, almost like a child. Although it was a 2-hour journey, my family would pick me up every weekend or every 2 weeks to visit. I believe my autism contributed to my challenges in socializing and made the entire experience difficult, especially in terms of branching out from home. It took my boyfriend's concerns for me to distance myself after a few weeks of dating, but maintaining regular communication with my family was also an issue for better or worse, as they were not very supportive and, in hindsight, were somewhat controlling. Due to this situation, along with my overall rigidity, we somewhat bypassed our honeymoon phase. I have always been a little needy and affectionate, but my expressions of love did not align with his. For instance, he was not one for public displays of affection at all. Over time, our relationship has evolved to include simpler gestures, such as cuddling at the end of the day or in bed, but we do not engage in kissing or other intimate activities. His family presents numerous challenges, and I am certain these have profoundly affected him. For example, he can never get his father to express pride in him, leaving him feeling unfulfilled regardless of how hard he works. Additionally, since his parents were often busy working to provide, he had a lonely childhood and endured a violent older brother. As a result, he tends to fixate on unresolved issues, which often leads to me conceding that I was wrong in some way. This process is typically filled with anger and feels one-sided. He dislikes being encouraged. He wants to proceed at his own pace but simultaneously experiences a lack of motivation. He knows he is capable of completing tasks, yet struggles to take the initial steps. He has significant difficulty opening up, refuses to cry, and tends to bottle up his emotions until he eventually erupts, which often accounts for his seemingly random outbursts of anger. He finds my tendency to cry bothersome as well. Since leaving university, we have felt stagnant. We lived together at his family home for 2 years, during which I secured a job at a local store because we were facing financial hardships. He attempted to find work later but was unsuccessful, resulting in disappointment, and time continued to pass. I wanted us to avoid remaining in this stagnant situation since pursuing university was intended to lead to better prospects. Consequently, I encouraged him to go back to focus on his craft, as he has a genuine talent for it. I can now see that my support may have pushed him away, and I recognize that loneliness played a significant role during that time. Despite my desire to help, I failed to provide the right conversations he needed while being overly vocal about my own feelings instead of recognizing his solitude. Since then, I have followed a similar path, striving to attend university myself to encourage him to do the same and provide him the opportunity to find a job. However, this time, I used the money I saved from work to rent a flat so that we can strive for better together. It is essential to note that this decision was primarily mine, as he was studying until the beginning of September and had no time to find a place to live with me. When I sought his opinion, he would become frustrated and often failed to provide me with a definitive answer when I asked if he wanted to join me, frequently replying with, "If you want me to." Since then, he has been unable to secure a job, and I have made an effort not to apply excessive pressure on him, understanding that he struggles with coping. Nonetheless, our situation becomes increasingly difficult as we cannot afford to live comfortably, and no jobs are accepting his applications. Over time, our intimacy has gradually diminished, especially in the past year, with the most significant changes occurring since I moved for my studies. I am aware that he is struggling and feels crushed by his lack of social confidence to pursue his dream job. His depression is weighing heavily on him, and I feel helpless, partly because I do not know how to help him. Last night, he mentioned feeling trapped and expressed uncertainty about whether he wants to break up. I am unsure how to handle this situation. I do not want to end our relationship, but I have told him that if breaking up will lead to his happiness, then I will accept it. I want to see him happy and thriving, but I feel lost regarding how to proceed. He cannot discuss this with his family, neither of us has any friends, and he refuses to consult a general practitioner or psychiatrist due to the high costs of medication and therapy. I believe he has felt this way for quite some time and wishes for me to initiate a breakup, but I do not know what his response will be if that occurs. I am uncertain how to approach him about this, as I anticipate he will say there is nothing I can do. What should I do? How can I approach this to support him? Summary: our relationship has been unstable for a while, primarily due to the stress of job hunting and living together in a flat. We are isolated and have no friends, in addition to my failure to maintain our initial affection, attributed to my autism. Last night, he expressed feeling trapped and uncertain about whether he wants to break up, possibly because he feels unable to do it himself. I want to remain together and explore new ways to support him. What steps should I take?